But Backpack was really born out of the ashes of FTX. We ourselves had over 88% of our operating capital sitting on the exchange. We lost $14.5 million. And when we decided to build the exchange, we knew we just had to do it the right way. Many exchanges that came before us, some, rely on, quarterly audited financials. Some do monthly proofs. We are just trying to, raise the bar and do it as frequently as possible. I would say I am surprised and disappointed by the lack of people that value that transparency. It might kind of sound a little sad to say, but it does feel like we've forgotten a lot of the lessons of the last cycle.
I'm very excited to have back on Coinage with us today, the co-founder over at another exchange, Backpack Exchange, Armani Ferrante, joins us one more time here on Coinage. Armani, man, it's good to see you.
Hey, how's it going? Glad to be back.
It's going well. I mean, we're talking everything exchange. We're talking your guys' news as well, which, by the way, as we talk about crypto exchanges, I think it's important to what you guys just announced over at Backpack, which is you guys are now publishing new daily reserve data to let everyone know exactly where everything stands at these exchanges. Maybe we start with that, Armani, because it's big news, and also just kind of curious to get your take on why Backpack wants to do that now. Now having reserve data published daily, some other people do it monthly or quarterly. What's the push here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, I suppose you know this, but maybe the broader audience might not know this, but Backpack was really born out of the ashes of FTX, right? We ourselves had over 88% of our operating capital sitting on the exchange. We lost $14.5 million. I could go on and on about the damage, both professionally, personally, emotionally, that was basically, that it had on us and much of the industry. Mm-hmm. And when we decided to build the exchange, after all of that, we knew we just had to do it the right way. And I think there's so much to do in terms of, rethinking how these exchanges are built. I think you listed a bunch of examples of many exchanges that came before us. Some rely on, quarterly audited financials. Some do monthly proofs. We are just trying to, raise the bar and do it as frequently as possible. So every day.
I mean, it's a question that I have as we'll dig into kind of Gemini's, IPO filing in a little bit, but particularly for things at Backpack and in your guys' history, because I was remembering we interviewed Can Sun as well, your confidant over there at Backpack, your compadre at Backpack, and the idea of kind of wanting to get to this moment, as you said, coming from the history of exchanges like FTX or maybe others, by the way, as well, who haven't given that level of transparency. And so it's interesting to kind of think about everything that happened, but then still having exchanges that issue their own tokens and not necessarily giving that level of transparency to other people around, hey, this token's priced here, but here's where you might want to know how much of that is necessary for kind of our reserves or anything like that. I'm thinking of BitGet might be in one of those that has a token, and some of the others. I mean, is it kind of surprising to you to not have seen others want to kind of push in this direction since the crypto winter?
I guess it's surprising in the sense that the bar for transparency continues to be quite low. I think you do have to give credit where credit is due, especially to all the exchanges that are publishing monthly reserve data. But I think it's also fair to say that that's also just not enough, and that we should be getting as close as possible to real-time reserve data as possible. And reserve data, to be perfectly clear, is only part of the solution. It's a super nuanced problem to be able to evaluate the solvency of a given exchange. You have to consider not only proof of reserves, you have to consider things like, for example, margin risk, and things like, margin models and things of that nature, right? If I actually, take, FTX as an example, but any, margin system, bankruptcy is actually a valid state transition. There are non-fraudulent ways that you can go to zero and lose all the money, right? If I have a borrow lending pool, I can lend in assets and I can lend my Bitcoin. You can deposit in USDC and you can pull my Bitcoin out of the exchange. And now there's a hole, but that's a perfectly legitimate hole. It's fully collateralized by your USDC, but that's not going to show up in the reserve data. And so it's an extremely nuanced question that requires, tackling it from many different angles. And so to get back to your point or your question, it is, I suppose, a little disappointing to see basically nobody trying to tackle this from all fronts. Maybe you have the folks that have publicly audited financials with maybe some of the more comprehensive auditing. But it's just, it's not impossible work. It's not rocket science. It's just good old fashioned, engineering and hard work.
Yeah, I also think, speaking of that, in terms of transparency now, the other big thing outside of exchanges, in terms of what you guys are doing with changes to the reserve publishing schedule and transparency, the other thing is digital asset treasuries and the idea of kind of how hedged some of these might be. You never really know. I mean, no one wants to sell. Obviously, as sailors kind of set up this whole idea of I'm going to buy and I'm never going to sell. But I think some of these other ones are pretty sophisticated in terms of, hey, we're going to buy some hedging around all this. We're going to hedge our incredible spot volume holdings of ETH and maybe potentially buy some out-of-the-money protection here. And I do wonder if maybe that's also a piece of this that might be forgotten in terms of where transparency is important for all of this, Armani. As you kind of see it play out, I guess I'll ask the same question in another way. Is it kind of surprising to see like transparency, and I suppose you would disagree since you're doing this now, that there are still people in crypto who value that level of transparency?
I would say I am surprised and disappointed by the lack of people that value that transparency. I think it might kind of sound a little sad to say, but it does feel like we've forgotten a lot of the lessons of the last cycle. And you're seeing, new things, that rhyme, I suppose. Nobody in particular, but it's just the general human, I guess, biases that we all have that create kind of these types of conditions for, I guess, mistakes, to put it charitably, to be made. There are people that care, but I do think that people tend to care retroactively more so than anything else.
Well, I think just to double click on that, I think it sounds like, if I'm reading the tea leaves there, is just that, we're hearing increasingly more and more kind of warnings around digital asset treasuries for being kind of similar in terms of building up leverage risks in the system for, hey, what happens when these premiums turn to discounts? How might these less liquid digital asset treasuries get caught in this and potentially have some problems? Is there a warning that you would also put out there, perhaps just on the record, for calling out what could potentially happen if that plays out? Because we're seeing more. I think we just had Maelstrom on the show not too long ago, Akshat, who runs things with Arthur Hayes, basically saying the same, that eventually digital asset treasuries are going to be what brings about another crypto winter. Would you fall in that camp as well?
Look, I don't know if it's digital asset treasuries or if it's another exchange collapse or if it's something else. I think the one thing I would say is that being transparent or not being transparent is a choice. And when faced with, the choice of whether you should, to put it in Vitalik's words from an old YouTube video from back in like 2017, 2018, when faced with the choice to explain something in a simple way and explain something in a complicated way, if somebody chooses the complicated and obscure way, it's usually because they're hiding something. And I think, if you just follow kind of some simple kind of heuristics, you can stay out of trouble. But being opaque is a choice, and we should all try to be as transparent as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And obviously, again, props to you guys for shifting into this daily daily publishing of reserve data. And I guess outside of that, just to back up and get your general sense of where we are, Armani, obviously it's exciting times. Haven't seen you since you were over here stateside in, well, I guess I did see you in Dubai for a little bit over the Sweet Basecamp thing. But I mean, I guess where do you put us now in terms of post-Genius Act, seeing excitement? We just had Coinbase on not too long ago too, talking about how they're going to try and take on Hyperliquid. I know you guys at Backpack have been pretty going full force in terms of building out what you guys are building out over there. What are you seeing in terms of, I guess, trading activity on Backpack, also demand for futures, perps, things like that, in terms of where you place us in, I guess, the life cycle of this cycle?
It's hard to know what inning we're in. I think we're just seeing increasing demand every single day. It's hard to know if that actually reflects the broader market sentiment. It does feel that with a lot of these acts, whether it's the Clarity Act in the House, or the new Senate bill that's coming, like there's a ton of stuff that's coming on the horizon for just really, I think, bringing structure and agreement to everything from asset issuance to market structure. And I think those are really the moments that I think you'll see a lot of fuel being added to the fire of innovation in the industry. And so I would say it's a lot earlier than people are expecting. And once we have some of this clarity in place, because right now I think we've opened up Pandora's box, but there's still a lot of open questions, especially for the more regulated companies like Backpack. And once those questions get answered, I think we're going to see a lot of just creativity unleashed in the space. And so I'm pretty excited, honestly. I would say I'm overall looking forward to what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, you've been through these cycles, obviously, many times before, and I think, there's a lot of talk right now about the idea of the 4-year cycle not being real anymore, mostly because these worlds have now merged. You've got the idea of just kind of macro markets meeting crypto markets and money going both directions, not just as we discussed through IPOs, but through DATs. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you're seeing things, particularly for where we are now, not look like other cycles, because as you just mentioned, it's almost like the dam's been opened, and now you got all kinds of institutional money coming into the space, and you've got all kinds of money now, as I'm seeing it, also get ready to be deployed, whether it is, a stable coin that could potentially overtake Tether, which is pretty crazy to think about for how long they've been in the lead. But that's not so crazy if you think about some of these traditional institutions being like, hey, look, this is our game to lose. We want to start participating and going toe-to-toe. I mean, it does seem like I'm now shifting in the camp of, look, we're past the days of everything that we once knew in crypto.
It does feel that way. And I think it feels that way because the cycle is less violent than previous cycles. It feels much more like a slow and steady climb. And I think really the other element is just how much the broader macro environment is just impacting everything, whether it's tariffs, whether it's the PPI print that came out the other day. These are all kind of things that everybody's paying attention to. And so I think it does feel different than previous cycles for sure.
In terms of what you're seeing now at Backpack, let's kind of shift into that too, because I know you guys are I don't know exactly which week it is in terms of this points program and kind of rewarding users for using Backpack. But talk to me about kind of what you're seeing with that, and I guess how you compare. It seems like, I don't know, Hyperliquid just has been kind of the one that everyone's been watching recently. And of course, they had their huge airdrop, and now many people asking about, what might happen there. But with your guys' points program, kind of giving you the floor here, Armani, to talk about what's planned around that and kind of, I guess, what you've seen by rolling that out.
So yeah, we're in week 17 of that program. I mean, I think the big difference between what we're building and I suppose what Hyperliquid's building is that Hyperliquid is a decentralized exchange that looks like a centralized exchange, and Backpack is a centralized exchange that looks like a decentralized exchange. And so we come at the problem from very different points of views, where they're trying to build this L1 network. where they have all these builders that are building on top of it. They have, they're trying to build a validator set, and they're trying to, I suppose, progressively decentralize the network to compete with the likes of Solana, Ethereum, so on and so forth, with essential limit order book as the data structure at the heart of the network. Backpack, on the other hand, is ultimately trying to build a regulated on-chain financial institution, right? So we think about compliance and licensing, not just in one country, but every country and every language that you can imagine all around the world, with the hopes of bringing crypto more broadly into traditional mainstream finance, whether that's through tokens and giving broader market access to spot assets, or whether it's through more traditional assets like equities or bonds or options, or maybe something like a Robinhood would offer. And so I think although there's, I guess, futures and order books at the heart of both of these products, we certainly come at it from a very different orientation, and we play very different roles, I suppose, in the market. I think the big thing that we have introduced to the world of centralized exchanges is this concept of a borrow lending pool inspired by DeFi, things like Aave and Camino, and putting that at the heart of a centralized exchange. And so the big thing that we introduced to the world was this concept of interest-bearing perpetual futures, where all of your collateral, all of your P&L, all of your positions are all bearing interest at all times. And so you can get margin with lends, you can open up borrows against your positions, you can have this very comprehensive perpetual future system, not just with the USDC margining, but also with spot margin, borrow lending, your lens as collateral, staked assets as collateral, and perpetual futures all in a single cross margin, cross collateral sub account. And so if you're to think about kind of Backpack, we're kind of an interest rate exchange, where it's, I think a lot of people in our community like to think in terms of wealth management, more so than maybe speculation, where there's a lot of interesting ways to trade, to kind of build your wealth in, hopefully sustainable ways.
To wrap up too, I think in terms of looking at exchanges is whether or not they're kind of a SEX disguised as a DEX or vice versa. I wanted to get your take as someone who's built a Backpack into what it is on the numbers published by Gemini. And I think it's an important question to ask people like yourselves who are more experienced at doing so than maybe myself, because I've never run an exchange, certainly less than two. And the idea of what they just published, I remember when I chatted with Paolo before USDC's IPO, and he was like, I loved what I saw in that report because they look bad. And then Circle exploded out of the gate. And so I mean, there's always two ways of looking at things, but when you look at these numbers, Armani, and think about where Gemini is as an exchange that's been around for as long as they have, to now report and stack up a net loss through the first 6 months of this year of $282.5 million seems pretty large. But what's your take, I guess, on what expectations might be for a name like Gemini coming out today, or where we are?
I mean, it's impossible to comment on another business, I suppose, without kind of knowing all the nuances involved in the day-to-day. I think, obviously Gemini is such a big and well-respected a name in the industry. It's kind of my job to think that I can compete with any of these exchanges, and certainly I think we can and will. But I can't really tell you anything other than, I suppose, it seems surprising. But impossible to know without kind of, I guess, talking to the leadership team. Maybe they have something planned that's special, but to be honest, the numbers are surprising, but I can't really comment intelligently about what they're doing over there.
All right, very good. Well, we'll have to leave it there because we got to run here on Coinage. But as always, Armani Ferrante, appreciate you coming on here to chat, the co-founder of everything going on at Backpack. Thanks again for the time, man. Appreciate it. And that's going to do it for everyone here at Coinage as well. Appreciate you tuning in. As always, you can check out all the big headlines at coinage.media. We'll see you again soon.